I mentioned that we went into the valleys for a good night on the valleys, and I had to include this slide after I heard mention of the introduction. So there have been more than, how many shows have there been? I think there have been 3 out of our 13 shows. 3 shows so far have incorporated the raffle as an intrinsic piece of the theatrical landscape. So this was Boyd Clapp, who played a manager of a miners' hall in the South Wales valleys that he was desperately trying to keep open. In another scene, Boyd, the opening scene actually, the first ever scene in National Theatre Wales, I got in terrible trouble about this from some people, but the first ever scene for National Theatre Wales involved Boyd Clapp coming on stage dressed in a chicken suit, which was considered by some to be perhaps an inappropriately dignified start to the new National Theatre. But I blame you guys because you inspired me to do things like that. We also, when we do things like the Valleys show, is really try and create a sense of event, getting the sense of hosting that you're so good at. So for this show, we had a local burger company set up a store called Bevan's Meats and Treats, which you could choose between a burger and a relaxing massage as you came into the venue. And that theme ran throughout the show. Again, as I'm sure you found with a lot of your shows, that work was deeply embedded in local stories. We were going to venues where, to be honest, particularly not with the night out venues, but with some of the local authority venues, we were being told, oh, you'll never get more than 20 a night for drama. And we were turning people away, selling 600 tickets a night. We could have sold them 3 times over. It was partly the excitement of a new national theatre, but in those communities, by and large, it was the excitement of the stories that people had told us being taken seriously and performed with gusto. Sometimes we've also dealt with much more difficult subject matter. The next couple of images are from a piece called Love Steals Us from Loneliness. And this is a piece that we commissioned off fantastic Welsh writer Gary Owen, who some of you will know from shows like Crazy Gary's Mobile Disco and The Drowned World. Gary's originally from Newport. No, he's not. He's originally from Bridgend. And as many of you may know, Bridgend was has mainly found its place in the news over the last few years, unfortunately, for at least being perceived, it's arguable whether or not this is the truth, but at least being perceived as a sort of a centre, in a way, for tragic teenage suicides. I don't know, those of you who do remember, about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a particularly sort of vicious press coverage of teenage suicide in Bridgend that sort of tied in with the press beginning to get to know about Facebook and basically presented a very unfortunate chain of events as Facebook suicide cult. So Bridgend has had to deal with the practicalities of that, which aren't just about PR and image, they're also about the fact that if young people are presented with a particular view of themselves, they may well buy into that view of themselves. So it was a very difficult and in a way potentially dangerous situation to enter into, to say we're going to do a located piece of work in Bridgend, because if we ignore Bridgend, we're perhaps ignoring the most difficult story that has emerged in Wales over recent years. So we commissioned Gary to do a piece called Love Steals Us from Loneliness. Again, we spent a lot of time talking to people in the town. This wasn't a piece that compiled local stories or did any verbatim around teenage suicides. In fact, ultimately, it wasn't a piece about teenage suicides at all, but it was a piece about how young people behave, what the loss of someone very close to you can do, and how grief can shatter your universe. This is the wonderful Mia Roberts, who played the mother of a young man who dies in a drunk driving incident. And there's a couple more scenes from the play. We staged the piece in a rock club in the centre of Bridgend, because that's the kind of place that young people in Bridgend go for their entertainment. And very importantly, young people with this one, this is an example of, I'd say, that middle band of participation, became involved as what we called our Halloween chorus. So when you entered into the nightclub, a number of people thought that they'd missed the dress code announcement because there were a lot of people hanging around in Halloween costumes. It was staged close to Halloween, and the play had a Halloween theme running through it. And so these were young people from Bridgend who'd be partying pre-show, running the karaoke on the interval. We didn't have a raffle with this one, but we did have a lot of other delights going on. And through that, we also set up a Facebook campaign. Someone may notice a couple of Arts Council Wales staff there. Are they here? Yes, there you are. So we had a Facebook campaign where you could get your photos taken with the Halloween chorus. They get posted up on Facebook. A lot of people would tag themselves and each other, so you've got some tags on the bottom there. And again, for a predominantly young people audience, that was a really effective way of getting a sense of ownership and engagement in the show. A show that involved, again, a lot of participation and use of local stories, predominantly from a more upper age range group, was a piece called The Beach, which took place in Prestatyn, and our host there with the Scala Arts Centre, which is predominantly a cinema rather than a performing arts venue. And this was a really interesting one because this was, in a way, one of our most digital and young people focused shows. It was an interactive theatre game that you played on the beach in Prestatyn, and it was all about why, deep down it was about why young people leave Prestatyn, but on a practical level it involved competitions to fill contraptions with water, milk cows that had been set up on the beach, compete to run fairground rides, etc., etc. So you really got stuck in with it. But actually, we decided to extend the reach of that one, not by adding more young people into the show, but by casting a chorus from the local amateur dramatics group, who were predominantly of middle age and a little bit older, who became the what we called the curtain twitchers in the show, who were the local people who were desperately trying to stop the event taking place. And as I say, you can see them there. These are our curtain twitchers in their anoraks in pursuit of anybody who's trying to have a good time in Prestatyn. And they were marvellous fun to work with and have stayed very involved with us. Some shows were participatory entirely in their staffing, as it were. This is a piece that we did in Butte Town, down in the Cardiff Bay area, which is an area that's been through a lot of changes and regeneration and a lot of difficulties over recent years. There's a piece called the Soul Exchange, which took place in the Coal Exchange building in Butte Town, and involved, again, a lot of local stories, but largely enacted by local people. And this is the culmination where people gathered in the Coal Exchange for the funeral of one of the characters that had been introduced during the play. But a lot of the play was actually a taxi ride through Butte Town, where you heard an audio play that had been written by a local writer, Anthony Brito, which described, which was done in the voice of a young man who was desperately searching for his father. That's just one of the audience members listening to the audio play and looking out of the window at the taxi at various things that were happening on the streets before he arrived at the Coal Exchange. And as I say, that was one of our most participatory projects. I'm going to come back to that project in a moment's time when we look at that third stage of people's own ideas being turned into theatre. One of the key things that we do alongside, or we did last year alongside every show that we did, was a project called The Assembly. And this is the Assembly for Butte Town, for the Soul Exchange that you just saw. And what the Assembly was, which is a really very simple and very doable idea, was a kind of evening of debate and performance that went on everywhere that we were doing a show. Now, often the shows that we were doing were taking a year, even in some cases 2 years, to prepare. But the idea behind the Assembly was that we'd do it in a week. We get together a group of artists, predominantly local artists, usually a mixture of professional and non-professional, and say, let's go out onto the streets and find out what a burning question is in this area. And then within a week, we'll put that burning question on stage in a mixture of performance and invite people to debate the issue. So this was the Butte Town Assembly. That's a bit more of the Butte Town Assembly. We'd usually get them to take place in an interesting local venue as well, often usually not a theatre venue. So this one took place in the old NatWest Bank in Butte Town, which is an abandoned bank. This one was in Barmouth, where you just saw the show that Mark had done, and we did that piece in the local ice cream parlour. And this one is in Milford Haven, which was done in a very popular pub in Milford Haven, and was partly hosted by a local character who goes by the name of Ginger Elvis. Although he doesn't look particularly ginger in that picture to me, but that's his name. In each place we'd ask a question. Sometimes the questions were very practical, and sometimes they were rather poetic in style. But I'm going to, I think, show you a clip now of the Bridgend Assembly, so the one that accompanied the event that we did in Bridgend, that had all of those issues around young people and issues of suicide, etc. So the young people there decided that they wanted to... Is there any way we can get the volume up on this? The young people there decided that they wanted to look at dangerous issues in life, but through the prism of love. God bless them. This took place in a bus shelter.